The CoinDesk Spotlight is brought to you by Nexo, the place to earn on Bitcoin, Ethereum, and more.
All right, our next topic. While the SEC has created a path for Bitcoin futures funds to go public, spot ETFs continue to get the axe. WisdomTree and Van Eck have both had their applications denied, and the SEC last week delayed a decision on NYDIG's spot ETF filing. And the SEC has also been settling scores, fining T0 $800,000 this week and issuing a cease and desist as part of a settlement with the firm. Joining us now to discuss is SEC defense attorney and former SEC branch chief, Lisa Bragança. Hello there, Lisa. Thanks for joining us. So off the bat, I want to get your critique on the SEC and how they've been regulating the crypto industry. Have they been fair, more conservative? I certainly wouldn't say that they've been particularly liberal or progressive.
Well, they absolutely are more comprehensive these days. They are broader in terms of what they are interested in looking at. Remember, it was just a couple of years ago where we had the avalanche of cases where they went after just about everybody who issued a token. So I think they are getting more targeted. The people at the SEC are more sophisticated. They're understanding better what's going on. And things like the Ripple case, really have a huge effect on them. They recognize that they can potentially get major pushback.
So, Lisa, just to kind of tease that out even more, we've actually had a couple guests on the show saying that, saying what you're saying, but actually in stronger terms, right? That the SEC is kind of cracking down on crypto, that it's become more enforcement oriented than ever before. One guest used the word repressive. In particular, they're comparing Gary Gensler to Jay Clayton. Would you agree with that assessment? I mean, that this is sort of like an enforcement era, and the SEC is actually coming down really hard on the crypto industry.
I'm not sure that I would equate Gary Gensler with Jay Clayton. I think they have a different approach. I think the SEC has been open to hearing from industry a lot more than under the Clayton era, and had kind of an open door approach. I think, though, it's always been an enforcement, regulation by enforcement, particularly in this space. Because you don't have the big established players in the space, and they're the ones that have the most control of the SEC, that have the ear of the commissioners most of the time. I mean, there's a theory of regulatory capture, and crypto hasn't captured the SEC. The big institutional players have captured the SEC.
So, Lisa, one common theme that we see whenever an ETF is denied, a Bitcoin spot ETF is denied, is this fear of manipulation of the spot markets. How much of a concern is that really, and who does the SEC think is manipulating those spot markets?
It's not clear whether that is a valid concern. I mean, we clearly have, these other regulators are comfortable. I mean, that's what we know, right? We know that the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and the CFTC are comfortable with securities that are based on Bitcoin. So from that perspective, the SEC is being, to some degree, excessively conservative, and withholding its approval of these ETFs. On the flip side, I think there are layers in between that protect the investor in the derivatives markets as opposed to in an ETF. And I think that what the SEC is trying to do is avoid approving something and then having a catastrophe. I mean, they are risk averse, and crypto is not a risk averse space. So we have a clash there that just is going to continue. And it's something that Senator Loomis brought up, yesterday in the hearings on Jerome Powell. Yeah. So just these kinds of conflicts of basic fundamental views of the markets, I think, are not going to get resolved soon.
Lisa, you mentioned the Ripple case. Do you think there's any chance that Ethereum could be designated a security by the SEC? It sounds a little bit outlandish, but Gary Gensler has in the past indicated that he does feel that ETH is a security, and I've heard some people saying that this isn't that such a crazy concept. What do you think?
Well, I would say that ETH. I mean, according to most people at the SEC, I think Clayton and Gensler, ETH started off as a security. It was offered, and people expected it to go up. It was based on, the efforts of the returns were based on the efforts of others. So what was interesting is that it's morphed into a commodity, more of a currency. And so I think that's the interesting trajectory that we may see with other tokens. Something may have been offered as a security at some point, but just become so used as currency. I mean, we could use Tesla stock as currency. We could all just decide on that. We can decide to use anything as a currency. It's changing from being offered as something that is going to offer returns based on the efforts of others to this is just a store of value, a way for us to exchange, so that I don't have to go to Walgreens and trade my legal services for toothpaste.
I suppose that's why these safe harbor rules have been proposed to give these projects time to become commodity-like cryptocurrencies, if that's the goal that they have. But, pivoting to the hearing yesterday, you just mentioned, with Senator Cynthia Lummis and her critique. I wonder, what were some of your top takeaways from Fed Chair Jerome Powell's hearing?
There were two major things that I took away from that. Number one was I thought Senator Lummis raised a really important point, and it is that these state chartered banks, the SPDIs in Wyoming, have not, they've had applications pending for, a long time. I think the first one was in from Kraken or Avante, then that was in 2020. And this points out one of the fundamental problems we have with federalism. These applications were to open a master account at the Federal Reserve so that these banks, these SPDIs, would have access to the Fed window. And, my first reaction is that's perfectly logical, particularly because these SPDIs would have to maintain 100% of their deposits on reserve. So they're not like banks. There isn't the risk. The reserve or the deposits would not be insured by the FDIC. So it seems like there shouldn't be a problem. But here's the difficulty. These are entities. These are depository institutions that are regulated by state. And we have a history, if you remember back during the Great Recession, of state agencies not necessarily being able to fully manage the complexity of new products out there. I mean, let's remember AIG, right? The state insurance regulators blew it. They just didn't get that AIG was doing something, and that became systemically dangerous. And that's, I think, the fundamental thing that Jerome Powell did not want to say. Who wants to say to a senator from a state, we're not confident that your regulation or your management of these state banks is going to be adequate? So that was one thing I took away. The other thing I took away was that it was interesting to see how the chairman dealt with insider trading and the fact that he's had 3 people, prominent people, Robert Kaplan, Eric Rosengren, Richard Clarida, resign over potential, insider trading. I mean, they haven't been charged, but, clearly there are improprieties, let's say, in terms of their reporting of their trades. And so he touted his new, the new system that the Fed has put in place, that they are not going to allow equities trading. Everybody's going to have to buy mutual funds, and you're going to have to put in orders 45 days in advance, and you're not going to be able to cancel those orders. Yeah. So it's a nice process.
I did want to ask you a little bit more about that because, of course, Professor Clarida resigned from the Fed 2 weeks before he was going to expire anyway, just because of all this controversy. And Chairman Powell was basically several times it was brought up, this whole idea of insider trading. Yet that's coming from Congress, so which has been notorious about having these guys doing trades while they're looking at the legislation before anyone else does. How bad of a problem is it, not just at the Fed, but within government itself? Who's exempt from insider trading rules still? And has there been any reform from lawmakers to police themselves to the point that they are basically at par with the general public when it comes to insider trading?
Oh, that's so, there's so much good stuff in there, and I'm glad you brought it up. Yes, it was kind of rich to have Congress folks who basically exempt themselves. I mean, yes, there have been insider trading cases settled against members of Congress, and they are subject to certain statutes. I mean, there was a recent statute, but to be honest, it's really hard for the SEC to go hammer the folks who write their paychecks. That is always going to be a problem. So even if the law applies, we really do need some more buffered group to be able to bring those types of charges and do those investigations. And maybe that can be a group within the SEC, but that's why we have inspector generals. But you absolutely identify a huge problem, Lawrence, and that's that people in government get inside information, material, non-public information all the time. And that just was not a priority, addressing that, for the last, I would love to say just a short period of time, but, it's been decades. We've talked about it, we know about it, and nothing's happening. If we want to instill confidence in our government, this is a way to do it. Congress can adopt the same kind of process that the Fed has. And I thought it was really quite lovely the way that Chairman Powell just laid out this wonderful system. And, the elephant in the room was Congress doesn't have that. So it was quite lovely.